Recently, the MTA announced that they will not go for street running on the IBX, and not for a tunnel under the All Faiths Cemetery. Even though it took them 2 years to come to this decision when in reality they should have come to it like the minute they announced this project, it is better late than never, and I am very happy that street running won't be a thing anymore. With this decision, I think it is a good idea to re-examine the IBX project, because so much has happened since February. So let's talk about the IBX again. In my previous video on the IBX, I said light rail is fine for the IBX. After reading BQ Rail's article on the IBX, I have since changed my mind and I no longer back light rail for the IBX. This is because I wrongly thought FRA rules prohibit subway trains next to freight trains. The correct analysis is that subway trains could run with freight trains if you build a fence or a wall. And I want to apologize to RM Transit and everyone for giving you all the wrong information. But recently, I saw something that caught my eye. Apparently, the MTA is really interested in automating the IBX, which is good. However, that will invite a fight with the unions, which the MTA doesn't want. But if the MTA chooses light rail, they can skip those rules and automate it. At that point, it will likely be a light metro, because it uses smaller train cars and operates on a grade-separated right-of-way. But this is still a theory, so I don't really know. Still, my ideal would be automated A-division cars on the line. And we can call it the 9 train, as the 8 designation would be taken for a 7 train branch to the LIE. I think this is lost in discussion when talking about the IBX. After all, it is just a given that transfers in the New York City subway are supposed to be in system. But that is not the case for the IBX. Most of the transfers are going to be out-of-system transfers. Although the MTA is setting up the infrastructure for out-of-system transfers through Omni, out-of-system transfers aren't the ideal. It creates a mental barrier. After all, you have to exit, walk a bit, and then re-enter the system again. Contrast that with in-system transfers, where you just walk through a passageway, which is far less of a mental barrier. Therefore, I think the MTA should make the IBX have in-system transfers. For example, at 8th Avenue, why not extend this overpass over the Bay Ridge tracks? This will create an in-system transfer for pennies on the dollar. However, for Broadway Junction, there is some hope. According to BQ Rail, the MTA is looking into putting the IBX platforms closer to Broadway Junction, and the proposed location is my ideal, where you put the station so that one end is closer to Broadway Junction, while the other end is closer to the LIRR's East New York station. That is some good news. Roosevelt Avenue is a different story. The MTA still intends on building this station here. As I mentioned in a previous video, the station is going to be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, placing a station here is relatively cheap, and in the future, extending it would be much easier. On the other hand, it is a 4-minute walk to Jackson Heights Roosevelt Avenue station. Oh, did I mention that this is going to be an out-of-system transfer? Even if this is an in-system transfer, it is still going to be a 3-minute walk. Still not good. Some people ask me whether using the abandoned upper level at Roosevelt can happen. It probably can, but if you want to extend the line to the Bronx, where would you go? After all, this is an upper level, not a lower level, which means if you dig west, you hit QBL. Also, the 7 is above, and you have to heavily reinforce the structure, driving up costs. So I don't like the idea. Another idea is potentially moving the 7 platforms to the west and closing 69th Street. But again, I don't like the idea. It does nothing for riders who want to take QBL, and the 1 million or so riders at 69th Street annually will shift over to Roosevelt, which will further add riders to an already delay-prone station. Actually, I am surprised that the MTA didn't entertain the idea of converting Woodhaven Boulevard into an express station, so that QBL local riders further east won't have to transfer at Roosevelt. But whatever. Fighting to make Woodhaven Boulevard an express is a separate project, and isn't under any serious time crunch, unlike a certain useless Walmart Highline. If it was up to me, I would dig a deep bored tunnel under 73rd Street so that it hits the western part of the station. This will allow an easier transfer to the 7 and QBL, as that is where the main passageway between the two stations are. Also, this approach future-proofs the IBX. When the MTA decides to extend the line to the Bronx, you don't start under the 7, but rather somewhere in Jackson Heights. And that segues to Now, the reason why I made Roosevelt Avenue the way it is because I sort of gave up trying to cheapen the IBX extension to the Bronx. Every cheap way of extending the IBX to the Bronx creates much bigger problems. For example, you can route the IBX over the Hellgate Bridge, but that interferes with Amtrak services, freight trains, and the future Penn Station access service, as that takes 2 tracks out of 4. Sure, you can time everything super precisely, but the minute something goes wrong on the bridge will invite chaos, and I don't want to chance it, considering that this bridge carries the entire Northeast Corridor, a line that accounts for 20% of the US GDP. Also, when IBX trains exit the bridge, the only suitable location is to go north to Hunts Point. The Port Morris branch right-of-way is blocked by some developments, plus would have a mistransfer to the 2 and 5 trains. Finally, any attempt for a cross-Bronx crosstown, which should be looked into, would involve an awkward curve. No thank you. Furthermore, because there isn't a good way of traveling between the Bronx and Queens, it is hard to gauge where the traffic is coming from. Bus ridership indicates that Bronx to Queens ridership is heavily concentrated from Flushing to the East Bronx. However, the center of gravity of the Bronx isn't in Eastern Bronx, and the center of gravity of Queens isn't in Flushing. This indicates that if we build a Bronx to Queens connector that parallels the Q44, it is likely going to make people backtrack, which adds more time to their commutes. That is why I gave up on cheapening the IBX extension to the Bronx. Every cheap alignment has flaws, and the route of travel from Bronx to Queens is really hard to pinpoint because of our limited infrastructure. If we can't use the Hellgate Bridge because of capacity issues, the likely response is to build a tunnel. And if we have to build a tunnel, why don't we do it in the most idealistic way possible to maximize returns? This is why I advocate a deep bore tunnel under 73rd Street to Grand Central Parkway, turning east, serving LaGuardia Terminal A only. Terminals B and C will be served by the Astoria line. Then the IBX tunnels will dive under the East River and end up at Hunts Point. From there, it will parallel the BX6 to Yankee Stadium. I believe that this alignment is better than my initial way of extending the IBX. But now you get to serve LaGuardia Airport in the heart of Hunts Point, the latter of which is a transit desert that is also a top employment center of the Bronx. It is also a more natural Bronx crosstown, paralleling one of the most used Bronx crosstown bus lines, the BX6. With this increase of destinations, I think the high cost can justify the extension. Anyway, this marks the end of this video. What do you think about the IBX? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.